U.S. President Barack Obama gives his last State of the Union address Tuesday night. Human rights groups accuse the Ugandan government of various forms of torture to intimidate opposition supporters. And we'll examine the health challenges of the internally displaced in South Sudan. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. We'll have those stories in a moment, but first, a massive blast in Turkey Tuesday has rocked a central historic district in Istanbul, killing at least 10 people and wounding 15 others, according to the governor of Istanbul. Turkish President Recep Erdogan condemned the attack and says a Syrian suicide bomber is believed to be responsible. The explosion hit Istanbul's Sultan Hamid district, a major tourist area that is home to attractions such as the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia. Witnesses described the blast as loud and said that it shook the ground. Turkey has been on alert for attacks since an October double suicide bombing killed more than 100 people at a gathering of peace activists outside a train station in the capital, Ankara. Turkish forces have also been carrying out an offensive against the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, which has been blamed for attacks, including those targeting police and soldiers. Turkish warplanes are also taking part in the U.S.-led campaign of airstrikes targeting Islamic State militants in Syria. U.S. President Barack Obama is set to deliver his final State of the Union address on Tuesday night. The president is likely to talk about the global war on terrorism, in addition to presenting his optimistic vision for the future of the United States. VOA White House correspondent Aru Pandey has more on what else the American people can expect from their commander-in-chief during tonight's speech.
Since I took office 7 years ago in the midst of crisis, I don't think I have ever been more optimistic about a year ahead than I am right now.
It's this optimism, not just for 2016, but also for the years ahead, that White House officials say will be showcased when President Obama addresses the nation in his last State of the Union message on Tuesday. Unlike last year, when Obama laid out specific proposals, including providing free community college tuition and bolstering cybersecurity, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest says this year the president will focus on his long-term outlook for the country and also counter the pessimism heard in the presidential campaigns and reflected in public opinion polls.
And so much of the rhetoric that we hear from the other side is focused on fearing the future and being anxious and insecure about a changing world. The fact is, the United States is better positioned than any other nation in the world to capitalize on the opportunities that lie ahead for us.
That does not mean the president will not take time in his address to point out what he has accomplished since taking office in 2009, as he laid out in his most recent weekly address.
Our businesses are now on a 70-month streak of job creation, with more than 14 million new jobs in all. We've revamped our schools and the way we pay for college. We've made historic investments in clean energy and put ourselves on a path to a low-carbon future.
On the global front, Obama will likely showcase his recent diplomatic successes in normalizing ties with Cuba, reaching a nuclear agreement with Iran, and working out a deal on climate change. But George Washington University professor Matthew Dallek says Obama also will likely address the ongoing challenge of terrorism and the fight against the Islamic State militant group.
A defense of his record on ISIS and also maybe a critique of the idea that we can simply send in U.S. ground troops back into Iraq and into Syria to solve this problem, or that you can simply bomb your way out of the problem.
Despite the public's concerns about national security, White House officials say the president has never been more confident in the country's capability to confront challenges, a message Obama will deliver to the American people directly on Tuesday. Aru Pandey, VOA News, the White House.
Well, the Ugandan opposition is accusing longtime President Yoweri Museveni of using killings and torture to curb support for the opposition. Museveni, 71, has ruled Uganda for nearly 30 years and is seeking yet another 5-year term. Former Prime Minister Amama Mbabazi, one of the campaign frontrunners, claims 9 of his supporters have been assaulted, arrested, made to disappear and even killed. Rights groups have long accused Museveni's government of using illegal arrests, beatings and other forms of torture by security personnel to intimidate opposition supporters. In its latest report, Human Rights Watch says the Ugandan government and ruling party officials are also intimidating and threatening journalists and activists in an effort to limit criticism of the government. The government has not commented on the latest allegations. Well, for more insight into the Ugandan situation, I'm joined via Skype from Kampala by Maria Burnett, Senior Researcher, Human Rights Watch. Maria, first, we've heard about human rights violations, complaints in Uganda for a long time. Are things the same or are things getting worse?
Well, it's hard to say when you look at the situation over 30 years, but certainly as elections get closer, there is an increased sense of tension. We saw some skirmishes and clashes between different supporters before the new year. So my sense is that things here remain tense. People are hopeful that this situation, that the election can happen free from violence. But obviously during the last elections, the campaigns and elections themselves were generally free of violence. And then it was in April that there was violence after there were anti-government protests for inflation prices. So we shall see.
Now, in your report, you say there's a very deliberate targeting of journalists, and particularly those who write or broadcast in the vernacular, in Ugandan languages. Why are they very critical in this campaign?
Well, I think it's important that when we talk about free expression and a free media in any country, we look at where the vast majority of voters are getting their information. And Kampala, the capital, does have a, generally speaking, free press. You can express divergent views in the print media in English. We've certainly seen media houses suffer from government attacks over the years. There were 4 radio stations pulled off air in 2009. We saw the shutdown of one of the major independent newspapers, the Daily Monitor, in 2013. But generally, it's possible to criticize the government and the president in Kampala. There's no doubt. Upcountry, the situation remains, different. The vast majority of voters are based upcountry. Many of them don't read in English. They get their news in local languages. Uganda has many local languages, and the situation there is quite different. There, we did 170 interviews across 8 different towns, and we found time and time again that journalists, media managers, station managers face visits from district police commanders, resident and district intelligence officers, and resident district commissioners who represent the president in every district, trying to dissuade them, intimidating them, and obstructing their reporting, particularly to give the opposition a platform on certain issues.
Now, Maria, very quickly, would you say the conditions on the ground lend the situation to a free and fair elections?
It's a very challenging environment here. Clearly, the incumbent has an incredibly strong running head start and a lot of access to state power. So it is a very difficult environment for free and fair elections. We certainly hope that we shall see them, but I think this is a challenging environment, no doubt.
Thank you very much, Maria, for your insights.
Thank you, Vincent.
Well, Maria Burnett, Senior Researcher for Africa with Human Rights Watch. Well, going to Europe, Europe's immigration crisis has taken a new twist after reports that New Year's attacks on women in Germany were organized by immigrant groups. Swedish authorities now have to answer allegations that police covered up similar attacks on women in Sweden. VOA's Laritza Hoke has more.
Thousands of demonstrators took to the streets of Germany's eastern city of Leipzig to call for tolerance in the wake of anti-immigrant protests organized by Legida, a local offshoot of the German right-wing nationalist group Pegida. Anti-immigrant groups have long been protesting what they call the Islamization of the West, and reports of the New Year's Eve attacks on women in Cologne and other cities have boosted their cause.
These Muslim refugees have begun a generalized terrorist attack, an attack against German women, against white, blonde women.
Xenophobic mobs were blamed for a series of attacks against Pakistani, Syrian and African men in Cologne Sunday night. But many women came out to protest the violence.
What Pegida does today makes me angry. We all know that Pegida and hooligans who gathered today couldn't care less about women's rights. They always come here to beat foreigners. For them, it's about doing propaganda, not fighting sexism.
Meanwhile, Swedish media reports accused the police of trying to cover up the fact that immigrants were behind most holiday attacks there. National Police Chief Dan Eliasson said Monday the allegations will be investigated.
We have to get to the bottom of this. If there is any veracity to this information, it has to be remedied, and we have to see if someone has done wrong.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel said the uncontrolled immigration flow has to be stemmed.
We have to intensify the fight against the causes that make people flee. And then we will be able, and that is what we want for this year, to noticeably reduce the number of refugees. That is clear, because we also have the task to integrate them. That is what everyone talks about here. What would be the best integration method? And we know, since the terrible events that night in Cologne, that for integration we need the openness of the society, but the refugees also need to be willing to follow our rules and values as well.
For some people who grew up in the culture of chaos and violence, it may be the hardest part of the integration. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, hundreds of refugees are continuing to flow into Malawi from Mozambique 6 months after Renamo fighters carried out 2 attacks in Tete province. The fighting in July forced more than 700 people into Malawi, and refugees say they continue to flee atrocities and killings by militias. Lamek Masina has our report.
Refugees are entering daily at the newly established Kapise 2 refugee camp in southern Malawi. They tell stories about people they believe are Frelimo government fighters torching their houses and killing their relatives on suspicion of hosting Renamo fighters.
My uncle's son was shot dead just a few meters from where I was. When I rushed to see what had happened, he couldn't speak and was almost dead. I didn't hesitate, but ran away for safety.
Camp supervisors say they register almost 30 refugees a day, many women and children. Camp residents say they have not received food aid since mid-December.
We don't have clothes, blankets, and food. Although we're constructing makeshift shelters, we don't have any protection from the rains.
Many survive by working in nearby maize gardens or turning maize hussks into flour for cooking porridge. But the refugee influx worries villagers near the camp.
We are staying with these people in the village, yes, but we are living in fear because we believe that in time they will completely run out of food. They will start stealing from us in our homes.
The villagers also fear some of the refugees might have run with weapons that can be used against them. Mozambican authorities reportedly said those fleeing into Malawi are either thugs or lazy people.
They cannot say we are lazy people who are leaving Mozambique for free things, a refugee camp in Malawi. Here at the camp there are all sorts of people, including children, adults, and the old.
He says they will not return unless government forces stop terrorizing them. Meanwhile, international bodies are helping out. The UN has provided some tents, established a children's counseling center. Doctors Without Borders is providing medical help. Malawi had previously hosted Mozambicans who fled a 16-year civil war between 1977 and 1992. Lamek Masina for VOA News, Mwanza, Malawi.
Prosecutors at the International Criminal Court on Tuesday launched their bid to keep alive their post-election violence case against Kenyan Deputy President William Ruto. The case nearly collapsed after the withdrawals of testimony by multiple witnesses. Lawyers for Ruto and his co-accused broadcaster Joshua Arab Sang want judges to throw out the crimes against humanity charges against them, saying the loss of 6 crucial witnesses' testimonies left them without a case. But the prosecution lawyer says enough evidence remains to convict the pair accused of stoking ethnic tensions to unleash a fury of violence that drove their political opponents from their homes after national elections in 2007. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Well, coming up, health challenges of the internally displaced in South Sudan. Stay with us.
Green Beat. For a healthier planet.
Tasmanian devils are in danger, and not the kind that comes from Looney Tunes. The real Tasmanian devil is being threatened by rare contagious cancer that has killed up to 90% of the wild population in some parts of the Australian state of Tasmania. While breeding programs try to bring back their numbers, conservationists are using high-tech gadgetry to keep disease-free devils from falling victim to another problem.
Some of these little populations only have 2 or 3 mums breeding now, and if 2 or 3 of those get hit by a car, that's it.
David Pemberton manages the Save the Devil program. He says a virtual fence that alerts wildlife to approaching vehicles has shown promising results.
For the section of road without the virtual fence, there were 4 devils run over. The other section, there were none.
When a signpost detects approaching headlights, it sets off an alarm and begins flashing lights, keeping Tasmanian devils and other wildlife from trying to cross the road. I'm Rebecca Ward for VOA's Green Beat.
Well, it's time now for our health report, and joining us is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Vincent. Well, conflict and weather are presenting several challenges to internally displaced people in South Sudan, including malnutrition. Adu Chol is hosting a group of displaced civilians in her home state in Rumbek, central South Sudan. Many of the displaced have walked for nearly a week to get here. She says sometimes they don't even have enough food to eat, but they are safer here at the moment.
If I did not help them, they would be in a bad situation. That's why I decided to host them, because they have nowhere to go. They heard I am also nowhere, so they came to me, and I could not chase them away.
Fighting erupted in South Sudan 2 years after the country gained independence. Thousands of people have died, and the conflict has prevented farmers from planting crops, leading to a food crisis. Many people are hungry, and more than 2 million others are displaced. Observers say logistical constraints blamed on heavy rains have also hampered the delivery of food and other essential items to the displaced people. Nyepach Benilwok and her children are surviving on wild nuts and fruits from trees in the compound. She says the situation at home was getting difficult, so she and her family packed and left.
We left home because there was a lot of fighting and nothing to eat at all. The hunger was too much for us when we left that place.
The United Nations Refugee Agency and the local government have started registering new arrivals in Rumbek and are providing them with basic supplies.
We expect that more people will come if they're still having the situation still remain the same. And then when they come, more people come, we are in need of help.
The Famine Early Warning Systems Network, FuseNet, says about 2.4 million people across South Sudan are facing a crisis or emergency food insecurity. Agencies say South Sudan is in the grip of one of the world's worst hunger crises, and the situation is likely to get worse over the next several months. Joining us in the studio for more on the subject is Mark Yarnell, Senior Advocate with Refugees International. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we see that there is this hunger issue with the internally displaced. Can you tell us more about the situation on the ground? What is happening?
Well, as we've just heard in the report, the numbers are staggering. There's over 2 million people who are in need of emergency food aid just to survive. But within that, there are areas of continuing conflict where people can't be reached by aid workers. There's about 30,000 people estimated that are literally starving to death, but because of a conflict, they can't be reached. I think that's what's so tragic is that even in places where we can't access them, there isn't enough food, but for people who can't be reached, there's very little hope right now.
So there are people that can't be reached, but the ones that are able to be reached, what is happening? Because it seems like there's still a situation there, even for distribution to those that are there. Is there enough supply?
No, unfortunately, there's a lack of resources for the needs. One indication of how bad things are getting is that there's a major malaria outbreak right now, or an epidemic, I should say. There's 1.6 million people who are suffering from malaria, and this is a disease that is treatable and can be prevented. But because the Ministry of Health doesn't have the basic supplies in terms of medicine, in terms of mosquito nets, there are people who are dying needlessly because of a lack of resources.
So what are the issues here when we look at the big picture in terms of the role that the international community can play? Is it a lack of interest, lack of commitment? What is the problem? Lack of funding?
It's a mix of things. I think that it's the intractability of the conflict, I think, is what is at the heart of the crisis, and the fact that it's gone on for 3 years. With regard from a mortality standpoint, often there's attention on people who die from violence and from bullets. But the majority of people who die in conflict zones, it's because of health care. It's because they can't access basic services if they have a respiratory disease, or they have diarrhea, or they have malaria. And so I think what's happening is that we have many, many more people who are dying as a result of basic primary care issues. And unfortunately, it's not something that gets in the headlines, not something that attracts a lot of attention.
Now, if we seem to know the issues, then where do we go from there? How do we move forward in terms of solution?
I mean, it's tough. The basic, most fundamental issue is that it's the conflict that is causing this crisis and continuing the crisis for the population. So obviously the leaders, Salva Kiir and Riek Machar, need to get a handle on the groups who are committing violence continuously. I think that at the same time, while the U.S. is trying to get involved diplomatically, you need a united front from the neighboring countries, from Uganda, from Kenya, from Ethiopia. They helped to forge a peace deal, but they need to now make sure that peace deal is implemented. And without the support of the neighboring countries, I think that the leaders of South Sudan might not necessarily fully follow through on their promises.
Then how does Refugees International come into this big?
Well, I mean, we don't have an answer to the solutions of the conflict, but we want to go in and look at how the systems are responding, where people can be accessed, can they get the best kind of care. So we'll go into UN bases where there are tens of thousands of IDPs, internal displaced people, living, and we want to make sure that for people who can be reached, they're getting enough food, they're getting access to health care, and they have access to education. There are so many children who aren't in school right now as a result of this crisis, and there's going to be an entire lost generation if that issue isn't addressed. And would you say the biggest
need is money?
It is. Well, in terms of if there's enough money, then the actors on the ground can decide how best to spend it, right? Whether it's towards malaria drugs or treating diarrheal diseases, or if it's food distributions. Without that money, you don't even have the option. And at the moment, the crisis is desperately underfunded. Okay. Well, Mark Yarnell, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And that was Mark Yarnell, Senior Advocate with Refugees International. That's our Africa Health Report for today. Vincent?
Well, thanks a lot, Lino. Be sure to watch Lino Madu every Tuesday and Thursday for the latest health news in Africa, right here on Africa 54. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, the stunning stars from the Golden Globes red carpet. We'll be right back.
Conseil de l'ordre. de faire toutes les démarches possibles.
And we could have to discuss it in the next meeting.
As you see now, she's going to bring me a very big box full.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. The award season catwalk is off to a roaring start. Hollywood A-listers showed off their designer gowns in Beverly Hills as they arrived for the glitzy Golden Globe Awards. Actress Uzo Aduba was one of the ladies whose dress was inspired by the gold of the award. The nominees and presenters seem to be finally rejecting the usual parade of old-fashioned mermaid gowns and princess frocks and sex bomblet slithers in favor of chic simplicity. Both gold and red were among the trendiest colors of the night, but so were the gold old standbys, black and white, and, of course, plunging necklines and rich fabrics. Well, next up, things that make you go, The recapture of drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman took a surprise Hollywood twist when a Mexican official said security forces located the world's most wanted trafficker thanks to a secret interview with U.S. actor Sean Penn. Penn's interview with Guzman, who has twice escaped from Mexican maximum security prisons, appeared late Saturday on the website of Rolling Stone magazine. It was purportedly held at an undisclosed hideout about 2 months before Guzman's recapture last week after 6 months on the run. The official says the meeting between Penn and Guzman was held in Tamazula, a community that neighbors Sinaloa, home of Guzman's drug cartel. Well, and finally, imagine the luxury of a cab ride without having to make small talk with the driver. A South Korean university has been testing a sedan that finds its way to passengers without human intervention. The car looks almost the same as a regular vehicle. It even has a steering wheel, but it doesn't require a human to operate it. A student summons a cab with a taxi-hailing smartphone application similar to Uber. Soon after, the vehicle arrives to pick him up. With no driver behind the steering wheel, there is no need to worry about explaining your destination to a driver in a foreign language. Now, the snooper, as the taxi is called, has been driving around campus for the past 6 months without a single accident. And that is what is trending today. Rather cool. Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa. That's between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to the Voice of America's Newswords.
Here is a story that has to do with defects or problems with cars.
Listen for the word that means to take back something. Recall.
They had meetings over this defect. They shared complaints over this defect. Yet there was no investigation by the government and no recall by General Motors until 10 years later.
Recall. It is a word that means to ask people officially to return something.
In our story, there were major problems with some General Motors cars. The man says the U.S. government and the car company took too long to issue a recall, so the cars could be fixed.
Now, when you hear the word recall, your American English will be good enough to know what this news word means.